Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Athens, Greece on June 21st, 2024. I'm joined again today by Laith Marouf. Laith is an expert in broadcasting law. He is also a geopolitical analyst based in Lebanon, and he is the executive director of Free Palestine TV. And he comes to us today, as usual, from Beirut, Lebanon. Thank you very much for joining us again today, Laith.
It's great to be with you, Dimitri.
So, Laith, as you and I know, there have been some truly extraordinary developments in occupied Palestine and Lebanon in the last few days. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the dramatic news coming from the battlefield and beyond. I want to focus today on three things. And the first is an extraordinary 9-minute video that was published by the Islamic Resistance, which shows footage from its surveillance drones over key sites in northern occupied Palestine. Then I want to talk about the speech that was delivered by Hezbollah's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, I believe shortly after this video footage came out. And finally, I want to talk with you today about an extraordinary admission made by Daniel Hagari, the chief spokesperson of the Israeli military, in the aftermath of all of this. But let's get into it first with this video. As I indicated, it's 9 minutes long approximately. It was taken with drones from the Islamic Resistance over Haifa, Israel's third largest city, and other important sites in northern occupied Palestine. And I'm going to start just by showing people the introduction, and then I'm going to have a question for you about that. So if you just bear with me, let me pull that up. So there we have the introduction, and I just want to ask you one question about this. It's setting the context and showing us, the parts of northern occupied Palestine that were surveyed by these drones, or this drone, or these drones. I don't know if it was a number of drones or just one. In any event, there's a reference at the outset to something called I may mispronounce this, the hoopoe bird. What is that, Laith?
Yeah, so in Arabic it's hudhud, and the hoopoe bird, is a native bird to the area and to Europe. It is also mentioned in both the Old Testament and the Quran, in the story of Solomon, when he was, being told about Queen Sheba having the most magnificent throne in the world. And so he sent the hoopoe bird, the hudhud in Arabic, to check out the throne and come back to him and tell him how magnificent it is. Is it actually better than his own throne? So, it's the name of the drone that is the Hezb has used in this surveillance. It's bringing them the news.
Right. Well, I'm just curious to know what did the hoopoe bird tell King Solomon in the literature? That seems to be the most important part of this background.
Yes. So he basically got to, been told that Sheba has a better throne than his, and that's why he went and visited her and eventually married her, because also the bird told him that she's the most beautiful woman out there. So clearly it was, because Solomon in the Old Testament and the Quran talks to animals and the jinn and can speak to them and so on. So here we have the drone bringing the full details of Israel's military capabilities back to the resistance in Lebanon. And that's why it's on the one hand significant for people who are Muslim, but it definitely hit a nerve with the Zionists because of this story and the importance of King Solomon in Jewish mythology.
Okay, so let's look at the first. Okay, so let's look at the first sort of detailed segment of this fascinating video. First of all, that is a ginormous military industrial facility that we just saw, and it belongs or is operated by a company called Raphael. Could you start by telling us, and then we'll get into the details of this, what is Raphael and why is it so important to the Israeli military industrial complex?
Yeah, so it is the company that produces much of their air defenses and their, air-based technologies that go on their planes and their helicopters and so on. So, it is considered, according to Western propaganda, one of the most advanced producers of air defenses and air-based equipment. So it produces the Iron Dome batteries, it produces the David Sling and others, and the radars that go with them, and all of their bells and whistles for that. So, of course, this is why it's a huge facility. It has all the testing grounds, as we saw in the video, and Hezbollah flew over all of that.
And I saw, based on the labeling of these various sites at this huge facility, there was a command center, there was a missile testing facility, there were various types of air defense system, David Sling, which I think is supposed to be the most sophisticated air defense system. I believe there were Iron Dome batteries that were in there as well. I mean, is there anything they didn't see in that, in terms of the sort of major air defense and assets that Israel talks about? It seems to me they had complete visibility into just about the whole kit and caboodle.
Oh yes, and obviously, the video is titled Part 1, and also ends with what was allowed to be shown. So we don't know how much more they have, but clearly it's 4K detail of everything that's on the ground, and the intelligence of the Hezb were able to ascertain everything that's on the ground. So the storage and warehouses of all of those missiles, the headquarters of the company, where the engineering core is, where the radars are. So obviously, if the Hezb decides to hit these things, they can hit them very accurately, and not only the all of these warehoused equipment will be destroyed, but even the company itself will suffer huge losses in its engineering core, in its corporate leadership, that will all probably perish in such an attack. So this is a warning that, given the fact that Hezbollah has, over the last 8 months, practically destroyed all the Iron Dome batteries in the north of Palestine, and even one of the David Slings a few months ago, this shows you that they can also destroy the supply, that the Zionists cannot resupply themselves or rearm themselves for specifically their air defenses. And that is something that the Israelis cannot kind of recover from if it happens, because the United States right now is having shortages of its own for air defense systems. It's as we heard just a few days ago, canceled all the deliveries to its European allies because it can barely supply Ukraine with its needs of Patriot missiles. So if an all-out war happens between the Lebanon and the Zionist colony, we should be expecting that all these air defenses and the air defense supply system that the Zionists have will be wiped out within the first few hours, and the Zionists will have zero protection for whatever is coming against them. And I think it will become a more even matched battle between the Hezb and the Zionists on the ground of northern Palestine.
Okay, let's watch the next segment. The next segment features a community or suburb. We can talk about what it is exactly by the name of Kriot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but here's what that segment shows us. So you saw a few things there. It said the population of these various communities. I don't know if one of the communities is Kriot or Kriot is the name for this entire agglomeration of communities. Am I correct in understanding that these 260,000 people, colonists, are living in what is considered to be Haifa, or is this another collection of communities north of Haifa?
This is basically the northern suburbs of Haifa, across from the port of Haifa. And so, like we say, the Dahia here in Beirut as the southern suburb, the Kriot is a collection of neighborhoods that are the northern suburbs of Haifa. And yes, so it's 260,000.
And it's only 23 kilometers, I understood from the video, from the border with Lebanon. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Wow. And so the most interesting thing about that video came at the very end, where it said regime members' residences. That sounds kind of scary. What's that all about?
When I saw that, look, like I was translating this video, and I had to go, because it was all written in Arabic. I had to go look for all these things on the maps, because it's pointing to streets and stadiums and shopping malls and what have you.
Just
And
pause. I just want this is your translation, correct? Just so
this is my translation, and it took me a while because Google Maps purposefully hides much of the things that we're talking about in this video under orders from the Israeli government. And so for me to try to discover actually what's the name of these locations in Hebrew and in English so I can translate it, it was a lot of work. I had to actually use Russian map and search engines to actually see the locations and match them to the video. And on the one hand, that shows us how advanced the intelligence of Hezbollah is, and that they already have these names and they have Arabic translations for them and so on, which I had to reverse translate. On the other, that shocked me the most, like you, to see this regime residences. So this is clearly, for employees of the government and the military, there's a complex there of high towers that them and their families are given residence in for free, usually like universities, how the universities give housing to professors, or the military gives housing to professors. So, sorry, to soldiers. So this must be right now scaring the hell out of anybody that works for the Israeli regime that has government housing, because they know where their houses are. And so I wonder, of course, that these are going to be lower ranking and middle ranking officers and government workers. But I wonder, for the higher ranking officers and ministry officials and so on, does Hezbollah have actually their home addresses too in their villas looking out on the waters? This is what's probably scaring them all now.
That's a fair question, given that we've probably been shown only a selection of what they actually have. So let's move on to the next interesting section. And this is the Haifa port zone. So it said Haifa port, but that looked to me like, it didn't look to me like civilian marine facilities. It looked to me entirely like a major naval base for Israel. And people should bear in mind that Israel has very little coastline. It's not a big country. And I doubt that it has many large naval bases. And is this the major naval base of Israel? It certainly must be a very significant one. And I saw references there to submarines. There are obviously combat vessels. There were storage facilities. Again, this seemed to be a comprehensive overview of what is present at that major naval base. Your comments, Laith.
Yes, so the Haifa port has the military section, and the civilian section. And in the military Navy port is the largest that in the colony. So it is definitely the most significant. And later on we can see in video the civilian parts of the port, and the square kilometer area space of this port is bigger than the northern suburbs, the Krayot that we were looking at. So it shows you how large this port area is. It's definitely much bigger than the Beirut port area, maybe at least 4 or 5 times that size. So, we saw in the video there, the headquarters for multiple special forces units in the Navy, including their deep sea, whatever force, the headquarters for their submarine control, and the multitude of warships and submarines and their dry docks where they fix them. So this drone got a full, complete picture of what is there inside the port, and the surveillance and the intelligence of Hezbollah could tell them what building is about, to know that these are the headquarters of various units within the Navy. You must have intelligence on the ground or have collected it somehow. And that's very impressive. And I'm sure the Zionist Navy is really worried about its ships being sunk in the port before they even move, and their headquarters of these special forces and others being destroyed before even a war starts. So this could be like a Pearl Harbor situation for the Zionists.
Well, and the video segment we just saw included what was described as a storage facility, and from the air it looked gigantic. If there are large quantities of munitions for Israel Navy in that facility, then if it was struck effectively, the secondary explosions would be absolutely devastating. You might even see something along the lines of what was tragically experienced by Beirut in that devastating explosion a few years ago. I mean, I can't imagine that this is, allowing the Zionist military to feel comfortable about its prospects in a war with Hezbollah. And there were reports in the Israeli media, which I understand that Hezbollah has denied, that they must have assets on the ground, as you just indicated. Now, if Hezbollah does have assets on the ground, of course, it's not going to admit that. That was the last thing. So I don't think its denial really amounts to a hill of beans. I personally can't understand how they could, assuming these facilities are being accurately identified, we don't know. But the precision with which they are identifying specific structures in this naval base does suggest, if this is accurate identification, that they have intelligence on the ground, which must be, let's recall that 20% of the population of the Zionist colony is Palestinian. Would some of those people, I have no idea, but would some of those people be prepared to assist the Islamic resistance in defeating the Zionist regime? Presumably they would be. Any further comment on that, Laith?
Yes, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit later about the speech of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, but when the Zionists saw this video, there was multiple responses that came out from the Zionist officials and media. One of them claiming that while we didn't shoot down these drones, although we spotted them because we didn't want to scare the civilians in Haifa, which is a ridiculous,
If anything scaring the civilians in Haifa, it's this video.
Exactly. And the other one was claiming that actually these are drones that didn't fly from Lebanon, that there is some spies of Hezbollah on the ground in Haifa and they flew their drones there. And Sayyid Nasrallah in his speech referred to these two, excuses. And he said, well, either of those are actually very condemning to the Zionists. You know what? I'm not going to tell you which or what. If we have actually spies on the ground, then it's even worse for the Zionists if there's somebody flying these drones from inside Haifa. But ultimately, because we were shown that brief in the beginning of this video, with those multiple cities all across northern occupied Palestine, and that it said part one in the beginning, and at the end it says what was allowed to be revealed. And the Sayyid said in his speech that they have tens of hours of footage, and that they just released a little part of it. That tells us that there is actually tens of drones that are flying with all these magnificent cameras, undetectable by the Israeli air defenses and radars, and that have been collecting information over and over and over for the last 8 months, even maybe before that, who knows? And that now, the Hezbollah has minute-to-minute details about what's happening on the ground in North Palestine and the movement of the ground, naval, and air forces of the Zionist colony.
Okay, let's watch the last segment. There's so much in here we could talk about, but I want to make sure we have enough time to address the other important subjects that I wanted to discuss with you today. There was an electricity plant and a chemical, I don't know if it was a storage facility or a production facility at the Haifa port. And then we saw the Haifa airport, presumably that was the civilian airport. But then towards the end of that clip, we saw what appeared to be a military air base. What could you tell us more about what we saw in that segment, Laith?
Yes, so the major electricity plant in Haifa that feeds almost half of the population of occupied Palestine. So that's a kind of a warning by the Hezb that if the Zionists attack the little few electric plants that are left in Lebanon, that they can bring darkness upon the population.
But before you move on, just one question about that. I read an article recently which it was that Colombia was going to cut off its coal exports to Israel, which apparently would be quite problematic because its electricity generation plants are primarily coal-fired. Is that correct? And do you know what the means by which this particular electricity plant generates electricity is?
Yes, this does use coal, this plant, and upon the actual Colombians cutting the supply, what Yemen just did, 48 hours ago, when they Ansarullah sent 2 suicide drone boats that hit a huge container ship that is carrying tons and tens of tons of coal to the Zionist colony, and sank it in the Red Sea. So now we see the supply of coal going to the Zionist colony being rationed off. So we could see probably Haifa and other cities having electricity shortages very soon, before even Hezbollah attacks the power plant.
And they would finally experience what it's like to live in Gaza, where electricity has been the population has been deprived of electricity for well over a decade now. They get, I understand, a few hours a day, but this was before, of course, the genocidal rampage that's now going on. But in any event, that's the electricity plant. What do you know about these chemical facilities, and particularly that would appear to be a military air base?
Yes, so the airport has the civilian part and the military part to it, but it also has, of course, air defenses around it. As shown in the video, there's the Iron Dome batteries there. So the drone flew over this sensitive area with Iron Dome batteries, just like in the beginning of the video we saw in the Raphael industry zone, and didn't get detected, didn't get shut down, didn't get fired on. And so, this is very threatening. I mean, there's nothing that the Israelis can do really to stop these drones from hitting their targets if the intention and the order comes from Hezbollah to do so. And the Haifa airport is the second largest civilian airport in the Zionist colony after the Lid or Ben Gurion airport. And the air base there, the military part of the airport, is very important for their large planes, not for their F-15s or F-16s that are stationed in other locations, but for their transport planes, for their surveillance, C-18s and so on that fly, and air supply and so on. So if this airport is taken out, it'll be really hard to resupply the north of occupied Palestine with weapons and or to provide logistical support to the rest of the Israeli Air Force.
I have to say, Laith, please tell me if you've seen anything like this before, but in the many years that I've been following the developments in this region, both military and non-military, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen an adversary of the Zionist colony publish detailed video footage taken from surveillance drones or other surveillance assets in the air of sensitive military and civilian infrastructure. Have you ever seen anything like this? And if not, this must be something that is likely to precipitate a sea change in the psychology of the colonists in occupied Palestine. The whole project is premised upon this being a sanctuary for the Jewish people. This was never true, of course. It was never going to be a sanctuary, dispossessing an indigenous people of their land through murder and brutality and its discrimination and destruction of agricultural land and so forth was never going to create a safe environment for anybody. But surely now one would think a lot of people in the Jewish population of Israel must be asking themselves some questions that they were not asking themselves before about whether they truly can have security in this land. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I am not living in the Zionist colony, and I couldn't sleep the night when this video came out. I was dreaming with that soundtrack. Dun dun dun. Dun, 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 dun. I
That was
had
like
to
made it
spend.
a James Bond movie.
I had to spend the whole. I couldn't stop myself from translating it. I spent hours researching. I made sure the editors we were up until like 4 in the morning to get it out with the English translation for the world to see, because this is a one of a kind. This is the first time. It is groundbreaking. It shook the Zionist colony completely. And remember, this video was released the minute that Hochstein, the American envoy to Lebanon, who is actually a retired Israeli officer, arrived here to Lebanon to threaten Lebanon with retaliation. And what did the Hezbollah do? Release this video. And so he himself probably shat in his pants, when he saw this video, and it showed him that there's no negotiation, that Hezbollah is serious about this.
I believe his arrival, it's always so orchestrated, this Kabuki theater, but his arrival in Lebanon was timed to coincide with an announcement by the Zionist military that they had, quote unquote, approved the battle plans for Lebanon. I don't know whether their battle plans took into account the fact that Hezbollah now has detailed aerial intelligence of their major military and civilian infrastructure assets in northern occupied Palestine. I very much doubt that those battle plans, if they actually exist, will remain intact after this.
Yes. And so, look, Hochstein met with a retired general who's responsible for the negotiations always between the Zionist colony and Hezbollah, who doesn't meet with Hochstein, refuses always to meet with him. And so Hochstein came with his threats and saying that we need the ceasefire now. And lo and behold, the video was out, and he was shown the video, and he was told by retired General Ismail that the only message that Hezbollah has is that there will be no ceasefire, and nobody should ever come to talk to Hezbollah or Lebanon again until there's a ceasefire on the ground in Gaza. Otherwise, this war, Hezbollah is ready to take it to the end, even if it means the whole region goes up in flames. So it's clear the messaging and the psychological warfare. You were talking about the security of the Zionist colonists. The next day, it was recorded the highest number of Israelis leaving from the airport of Ben Gurion ever. Almost 68,000 Israelis left in one day.
You're referring to the day after the video, the Hupo-E video was?
Yes, the day after the Hupo-E video, 68,000 Israelis left. This is according to the numbers of Ben Gurion Airport. So this is the highest number ever recorded to leave in one day. And we're expecting, of course, this to increase. And if you probably count with the numbers that have left since October 7th, the Zionists are hiding them. I am imagining they've lost 25% of their population since October 7th, for sure.
And we should bear in mind that these people who are leaving, I mean, if you have the means to fly out at the drop of a hat, you're probably one of the better off members of Israeli society. You're probably not somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck. These are people who help the economy run in Israel. And their sudden departure, I mean, already you have hundreds of thousands of people having been taken out of the workforce in order to serve in the genocidal rampage in Gaza and the obliteration of large swaths of the West Bank. And now you see people who are still functioning within the civilian economy leaving precipitously with no warning. One would think that the Israeli economy is being absolutely devastated by this war. And I, for the life of me, I mean, I've listened to you talk about, and I think I myself have asked you about the inevitability of a full-scale war. I continue to be of the view, I think you probably have had a different view from me in the past, that this is inevitable. I'd see no way that the lunatics in the Israeli government aren't going to escalate it. One way they will, one way or another, because the alternative from their perspective is worse. The alternative from their perspective is an utter and undeniable strategic defeat, which is going to have dramatic consequences for the viability of the Zionist colony. For example, an undeniable defeat is going to precipitate a large outflow of members of the Jewish population within Israel, it seems to me. So I think they are trapped in a psychology and in a narrative that leads inevitably to a full-scale war with Hezbollah. What do you think?
There's a few things that you mentioned there. One is that, a huge number of people that have dual citizenship left already. But the other thing is, as you mentioned, everybody that has, specialization, high education is leaving. So the Zionist media are right now reporting that there's a huge shortage in doctors, and it's unprecedented. And so people are right now feeling like they are in Canada with the 60, I don't know, 7,000 doctors missing in Quebec.
For the non-Canadians who are listening to this conversation, we Canadians have been dealing with a doctor shortage for a long time. So
yes. So all these Israeli doctors have left to New York and to London and Paris and so on. So there's a very significant shortage in doctors. And you mentioned the reserves being called to fight the fight in Gaza and on the border with Lebanon, which is 500,000 people being called into reserves. And that basically takes away all the youth that are in the factories and the companies and the offices and so on. But what's significant about this call is right now there's 100,000 of these reservists that have disappeared, that are not showing up, that actually left the country when they were called in.
Right. So I want to talk to you in the time left to us about this speech that the Secretary General of Hezbollah gave. And the part that struck me the most, I don't want to confine our discussion to this, was his threat to, he didn't say that Hezbollah would attack Cyprus, but he said that if Hezbollah determines that the Cypriots are helping the Israelis attack Lebanon, that they would consider Cyprus to be a legitimate target and enemy. Now, before we launch into that, I want to show people a couple of clips from two reports, just brief segments of two reports that I did from Cyprus in the last few months. In the first report, I'm in Lefkosia, the divided capital of Cyprus, where I'm talking about activists having appeared at the British military base known as Akrotiri on the southern tip of the island. It was already known early in the genocide that the Brits and the Americans were shipping huge quantities of military equipment from Akrotiri to the Zionist colony, although they were giving very little detail about what exactly they were sending. And these activists, as I reported at the time, said, you know, amongst other things, I mean, you shouldn't be supplying Israel just because Israel is an apartheid state that's committing genocide, but you're also making us a target. So they foresaw that this might happen. And I also want to show people a little clip of footage that I shot from the edge of the Akrotiri military base, where a huge cargo plane was taking off and veering off in the direction of occupied Palestine. So let's watch that, and we'll come back and discuss your thoughts about this threat. So Laith, what is this threat all about? How serious do you think it is, and why do you think Nasrallah chose to make it now?
Yes, well, because in the situation of a full-out war between Lebanon and the Zionist colony, it is expected that within the first few hours, Hezbollah will carpet bomb all the airfields of the Zionist colony, so they wouldn't be able to do the Dahiya doctrine once more, or met the destruction that they did on Gaza, on Lebanon. So in this situation where Israel loses its airfields, any of its jets that are up in the air will have to land somewhere else and use a new base of attack. And the most clear location and closest one will be Cyprus. And given that it's a NATO member and it's an EU member, and there's those British bases there. So this is to preempt this situation. Nasrallah was saying, after that moment, if we see that the Zionists are using Cypriot airfields to attack Lebanon, then we will consider Cyprus to be part of this war, and we will attack it as if it is a legitimate target. And so this shook the government of Cyprus. Immediately, the Prime Minister of Cyprus called the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and the Foreign Affairs Minister called his counterpart here, and they made public statements saying that Cyprus has been neutral throughout this war in Gaza and will continue to be neutral. Do we believe them? I don't, because I think Cyprus is a colony. It still is a colony. It's a vassal state. Unfortunate for the Cypriot people, who are obviously as helpless as the majority of the populations in the West upon the decisions of their governments. But this is the truth. And a few things to be noted here is that Cyprus, as an island, the furthest point from Lebanon in Cyprus is closer than the south parts of Palestine to Lebanon. So it is much easier to actually hit targets in Cyprus than it is to hit, let's say, Beersheba or Eilat from Lebanon. And it's an open sea. There's nothing to stop. The other thing that in this threat that Nasrallah, Sayyid Nasrallah made, is that he will be targeting the whole Eastern Mediterranean. Okay? And he mentioned how up until now, it's been periodic moments where Ansarullah in Yemen and the Iraqi resistance are targeting ships in the Mediterranean once a week or whatever it is, and it's symbolic up until now. But if Hezbollah enters this battle from his shores, it can stop all the shipping from here to Sicily. From here to Sicily, it will be all stopped. To the Strait of Sicily, everything, the whole Eastern Mediterranean will be blockaded. And all the shipments of oil and gas to all Europe will be done. And given that Europe is suffering from shortages of oil and gas because of its war in Ukraine against Russia, I mean, we we will see electrical blackouts in Europe, not only in the Zionist colony.
Mhm. I have to get this off my chest. I have to tell a little story since we're on the subject of Cyprus. I've never told the story before. A few months ago, when I was in Cyprus reporting on what was going on at Akrotiri, I tried to do a portion of my report from outside the Zionist embassy in Lefkosia, and I, of course, didn't step on the property. That was not wise thing to do, to step on the property while I was shooting my report. I went across the street, and I was technically standing on Cypriot territory. I wasn't on the territory of the Zionist colony. And immediately when I began shooting, I wasn't hiding. I was out in the open. I had a tripod and a camera. A Cypriot police officer approached me and he said, please show me ID. And I showed him my press card. I showed him that I'm a citizen of Greece, a citizen of Canada. I gave him my business card. He said, look, I regret to inform you that we can't allow you to shoot here unless it's approved by the security of the embassy. And I said, well, I'm standing on Cypriot territory. Why does the embassy get to dictate whether a journalist from a European country can stand on Cypriot territory shooting this report with the embassy in the background? He goes, that's just the way it is. So he gets on the phone and he actually gives me his cell phone, and I'm talking to the head of security for the Zionist embassy. And he's got a thick Israeli accent. He's clearly an Israeli speaking broken English. And I told him what I just told you. I said to the Cypriot police officer, and he exploded. He says, listen, I'm going to come out there and arrest you. And I said to him, bring it on. You have no authority to arrest me. I'm standing on Cypriot territory. Here I am, come and arrest me. So at that point, the Cypriot police officer, he panicked and he took the phone away and he said, listen, man, I'm going to have to arrest you because that's my instruction if you don't leave here now. So I ended up having to leave. But this is just the reason why I tell this story is because it gives you a flavor for the degree to which the Cypriot government unconscionably cooperates with the Zionist regime. This little anecdote is just a piece of the larger puzzle. Cyprus's government is exposing the people of Cyprus to a potentially existential threat. Why? There's absolutely no durable, meaningful, principal benefit to the Cypriot people of this alliance with Israel. Now, I'd like to close it out, Laith, by talking about an extraordinary interview that Daniel Hagari, a senior officer who's the main spokesperson for the Israeli occupation forces, gave to an Israeli television, or it may have been a newspaper, several days ago. I believe it was on Wednesday of this week. He's a rear admiral, Daniel Hagari, in the Israeli Navy. And this is what he said. He said, this business of destroying Hamas, making Hamas disappear, is simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a party. It's rooted in the hearts of the people. Anyone who thinks we can eliminate Hamas is wrong. Close quote. Now, you and I were saying this before they massacred 16,000 Palestinian children in the name of destroying Hamas. Any sane person could see that they weren't going to destroy Hamas. Whether you like Hamas or don't like Hamas, a sensible person will look at the military reality and say, is this an achievable objective? And what is the cost of trying to achieve the unachievable? Well, we've seen what the cost is, and it's absolutely horrific. But be that as it may, the fact that Hagari is coming out and saying this now, and at the same time, you're seeing this extraordinary video, which unquestionably, for reasons we've discussed, is heightening acutely the sense of insecurity within Israel. It seems to me that this colony is in total disarray, absolute and utter disarray. When you have the head of the military, it's almost in subordination, because this is the stated aim of the elected officials of the state, to destroy Hamas. And he's publicly saying it cannot be done. What do you make of all of this? Are we witnessing the initial stages of an internal collapse within Israel, political, economic, and military?
Yes, yes. I mean, we've been already witnessing it for months now. And some would argue since October 7th, the stage was set. And that the collapse, the only thing that we can, argue about is how violent the collapse is going to be. So you know, if you look at what the Zionists have been doing, it's clearly that they decided from day one that the only achievable goal or tactical maneuver that they can use to maintain their strategic aim of permanency of this colony is the total genocide of the Palestinian people. Okay. And, you know, to see Gallant, the Minister of Defense, and Eisenkot, the minister without portfolio, but the architect of the Dahiya doctrine, both resigning last week, or is it a week and a half, 2 weeks ago? And now time is passing so fast, everything's merging in our heads. Both of them resigning. That was an indicator of the failure of the Dahiya doctrine and its implementation in Gaza, meaning the destruction of 80% of civilian infrastructures didn't achieve the goal of the aim of this war. So what's next? The only thing next is 100% destruction, 100% genocide. And ultimately, seeing the reports today and yesterday within the American media, talking about how, although the Israelis took the whole Philadelphia axis, that the majority of the tunnels between Gaza and Egypt are still intact, that the majority of the underground cities in Gaza are still intact. That shows that even, you know, going further than the Dahiya doctrine is not achieving anything. And for how long can they maintain this, given that both the fronts in Lebanon, the front in Yemen, the front in Iraq are all raising the intensity? There's going to be something that has to give. And look at what happened since the resignation of the Minister of Defense. You have these statements coming from serving generals, which they're usually generals don't speak out against their government. So there is now a battle between the political arms of the government and the military. And within the military now, there is actually fights. There's the fascist death squads that are you know, controlled by Ben Gvir and Smotrich, that are mutinying against the decisions of their generals and are continuing to film themselves committing war crimes or putting on a lingerie of women and so on, although they've been told not to do that by their generals. And then you have now Netanyahu running the show by himself. He's not even holding any cabinet meetings. And Ben Gvir and Smotrich are almost revolting against him. Netanyahu is saying that he will only allow them in a cabinet meeting if they are searched for bugs and listening devices before they come into the room, and if they are conduct lie tests, you know, what do you call them? Lie tests, you know, electronic whatever tests every day to show that they're not leaking information. And then they responded with the same, saying that Netanyahu has to be searched before he enters the cabinet meeting and has to do lie detection tests at the end. So right now, the cabinet itself is falling apart. The army is falling apart. And that's why we see the acceleration of Netanyahu's attempt to have a full-out war with Lebanon in order to drag the United States on the ground. His army has lost all the battlefields, and they cannot survive without direct rule by the American government and direct involvement of the American military.
Well, it's been always an enlightening and enjoyable conversation, and even though the subject matter of this conversation is so painful. I want to close with a reflection on something that happened this week. Actually, twice it happened to me. It sort of explained to people why it's important for us to have these conversations. And when I was seeing these conversations, I mean conversations about the military realities and developments. I was interviewing this week somebody. I'm not going to name the person. I don't want to embarrass them. I have a lot of respect for them, but this person's very knowledgeable about the legal aspects and the political aspects of this genocide. and is extraordinarily committed to justice for the Palestinian people. But when I asked him in the course of the interview what he made of the military situation on the ground, he frankly confessed to me that he wasn't able to offer me an opinion because he simply didn't know, which I found quite striking. And then I had an even more striking experience. I was asked to participate in a discussion, in a socialist studies discussion involving colonialism and imperialism. It was organized by a Canadian university, and I got into a debate with a Canadian professor, again, somebody who's very, very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, was extremely critical of Israel in the West in his presentation. But it's from some point in our conversation where I was expressing skepticism that the Canadian government would ever do the right thing. He said to me, "You sound very pessimistic." I said, "I'm not pessimistic at all, because I think that this is ultimately, Israel is hurtling towards a strategic defeat, and the resistance will bring this to an end one way or another." And he looked at me like I was a Martian. It had never actually occurred to him that the outcome of this horror show could be determined by a military defeat of Israel. It hadn't even occurred to him. And I just want to say to people, the reason why we have these discussions and we spend so much time talking about military developments is because that likely will be the means by which this genocide is finally and mercifully brought to an end. It could be done peacefully, but it is the West that is foreclosing the possibility of a peaceful resolution. It insists upon giving Israel the weapons it needs to consummate this genocide. And so ultimately it will be left to the armed resistance to bring this to a merciful end. And that's why people like Laith and I have these important discussions. Laith, do you want to add anything to that before we?
Yes. I mean, you're 100% right there. And I want to add to it to our viewers in the West. You know, if Palestinians hedged their freedom on the outcome of social movements in the West, we would be committing suicide. Because I have, studied the whole history of Western civilization, and have never seen, since World War II at least, have not seen one revolutionary government or movement getting to power in any Western country, save for Portugal momentarily, the Carnation Revolution that happened because of Angola's revolutionary defeat of the Portuguese military. But look, the Canadian public, can the Canadian public stop the Canadian government from genociding indigenous peoples and stealing their land and poisoning them and taking their children and raping their women? They can't. Why would I expect their demonstrations or movements to have an effect on the liberation of Palestine? Similarly, in the United States, look at what's happening to the African diaspora, the Latino people, the indigenous people. There's no, they forget even the minorities or indigenous peoples. Look at the working class in Britain, in France, in Canada. Can they stop the government from looting their savings, from mistreating their children? No, they can't. So don't tell me that I have to wait for the goodwill of the West. It is the arms, people that are carrying arms on the ground in Palestine and Lebanon, in the whole region here, that will liberate our people. And you will witness, we're already witnessing it, the biggest military humiliation of Western power in 600 years. Yemen has just ended the naval superiority of Western European civilization that dominated this planet for 600 years. Hezbollah just ended the air superiority of the whole Western military. And the fighters on the ground in Gaza for 8 months now, almost 9, have been holding just 30,000 fighters have held 500,000 Israeli fighters with all the special forces that we don't know about and all the mercenaries with them to a standstill. This is the biggest military humiliation the West has seen in 600 years. And what we will see coming next is going to be even a bigger humiliation. And maybe at that point, Canadian public, American public, Western public can rise up because of the sacrifices of the Palestinian people, of the Lebanese people, of the Yemeni people, maybe they will have some backbone then to liberate themselves.
I'm going to have to add a word just as I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be misinterpreted as saying I completely agree with what you've said. I have to just add this because I've thought about this a lot, Laith. Is there something good coming out of these protests? Personally, I see absolutely no evidence that they've had any positive impact on Western government policy. In fact, it's been the opposite. They haven't caused the Western governments to become even more supportive of Israel, but they have been accompanied by a dramatic increase in support for Israel at the governmental level. I mean, you look at the repression that's going on of civil society, the attack on our right to free speech. You look at the weaponry that's being sent to Israel, the huge quantities, increases in economic aid, all the vetoes at the UN Security Council. The more we protest, it seems, the more Western governments support this diabolical, sadistic, satanic regime. But I will say this, you may not agree. I think that it is important that the Palestinian people know that there are millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in the West who care deeply about their suffering and want their freedom. I think that's important for them to know that. And I do think that there are Palestinians who derive comfort from that, and it helps them in their hour of desperate need. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but for that reason alone, I think it's worthwhile to protest.
Yes, you're right. I support
don't
you
see
on
it
that.
having any positive impact on government policy, but maybe that'll change. Always
Yeah, I do support what you're saying, and I'm not saying people to stop. I actually hope, you know, that it will radicalize more people to prepare them to save themselves from their own governments.
Here. Great talking to you, Laith, and I look forward to our next discussion. For
Talk
now,
to you soon.
talk to you soon. Laith signing off from Beirut, and I'm coming to you today from Athens, Greece.